You never expect your home to turn against you. You expect creaks in the floorboards, maybe a faulty light switch, or a leak that takes a few months to notice. But you never expect something alive to be in the walls. I didn't either. Not until the ceiling above my bed started to change. My name is Ethan Drew. I'm not one for embellishment. I work in IT. I don't believe in ghosts. And until recently, I would have scoffed at any story that began the way this one's about to. But what happened to me in that house on Lantern Street, what's still happening, is something no rational man should have to make peace with. It started on a Tuesday, sometime in early September. I lived alone in a house I'd inherited from my grandfather, a quiet man I barely knew. He died suddenly, stroke, they said, and left behind a 2-story Victorian in upstate New York. My mother never talked much about her father. I assumed they were estranged. After my lease in Albany ended, I took it as a sign. The market was a mess, and owning a house, even an aging one, was better than burning rent on a shoebox apartment. Besides, the place had character. Ornate moldings, stained glass in the staircase window, and the original fixtures all still intact. But also had problems. The first night I stayed there, I heard movement upstairs. Not like the usual settling noises old houses make. No, these were deliberate. Pacing, light but fast, as if someone was walking barefoot over the floorboards. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat and crept upstairs. My bedroom is at the front of the house, and across the hall is what I turned into a guest room. That's where the noise came from. I pushed open the door. Empty. No breeze from the window. No mouse darting for cover. Just silence. I checked the attic access in the hallway. Still sealed shut. It didn't make sense, but I went back to bed. The next morning, there was a dark blotch on the ceiling above where my head rested at night. It was maybe the size of a dinner plate, irregular in shape, with a smudged, sooty quality to it. I touched it dry. Not water, not mold. It was like ash had been pressed into the plaster from the other side. I took a photo, planned to show it to a contractor or plumber later. By the following night, it had grown. Not dramatically, but noticeably. 2 days later, it wasn't a blotch anymore. It looked like a footprint. Upside down, I know how that sounds. I thought I was imagining it too, so I tried to wipe it off. Took a sponge with bleach and scrubbed until the paint started to peel. It didn't go away. It didn't even lighten. That night, I had the dream. I was lying in bed, unable to move. My limbs felt frozen, like a weight sat on my chest. The room was unnaturally silent. No crickets, no wind, not even the hum of electronics. Just dead quiet. Then I heard it. A breath. Not mine. It came from the ceiling. I tilted my eyes upward. There was a face stretched across the plaster. Not in the ceiling, but under it, as if something massive was pressed between the floorboards and the plaster. The face shifted slightly, just enough to show one eye blinking, a deep black socket with no iris. And then it exhaled. A puff of black soot blew from the mouth that wasn't there, falling like ash over my face. I gasped, woke choking. My room smelled like smoke, but the air was clean. No sign of fire, no trace of soot, except the print had multiplied. There were now 3. They were in a line like steps walking across the ceiling. I called my friend Lena the next day. She's the most level-headed person I know, and she works as a contractor. She agreed to come by after work. I didn't tell her everything, just mentioned a potential leak, maybe mold. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. When she arrived, she stood in my room, hands on hips, squinting up at the marks. Ethan, that's not water damage. Yeah, no kidding. It's not mold either. Looks more like soot. You smell smoke? I asked. She sniffed. Nope, just drywall and old house. Then she did something that still bothers me. She took out a stepladder, climbed up, and knocked on the ceiling right where the prints were. The ceiling sounded hollow, but not the dry, wooden hollow of rafters. It was damp, like knocking on a sealed box filled with wet meat. She made a face. That's weird. Weird how? She shrugged. Never heard that tone before. Like the plasters separating from the beams. Could that happen naturally? In a house this old? Maybe. But this sound, this squish, it's like there's insulation soaked in something dense. You want me to cut into it? I hesitated. Yeah, but not tonight. She agreed to come back the next day. But that night was worse. I couldn't sleep. The air in my room felt thick, like I was breathing through a sponge. I turned on the fan. The blade started spinning, then abruptly stopped. The power cut out. The house went dark. No wind, no rain, just stillness. Then faintly soft like an old man whispering behind a door, I heard it. A laugh. Not loud, not fast, slow, deliberate. And it came from the ceiling. I got out of bed. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. I shined it up. A fourth footprint had appeared. This one was smudged, like the foot had slid forward. And next to it, something else, a handprint, pressed flat against the plaster. Fingers splayed, black soot filling every groove. The next morning, Lena didn't show. I called her 5 times. No answer. By noon, I drove to her place. Her car was still in the driveway. No one answered the door. I circled to the back. The patio sliding door was ajar. I called her name. Silence. Inside, the air smelled like burnt plastic. I found her in her bedroom. Still alive, thank God, but sitting on the floor, back to the bed, eyes open, unblinking. Her hands were black, covered in soot, and on the ceiling above her, more prints. Not just feet or hands. Faces, pushed against the drywall from above, as if something was trying to break through, but not into the attic. Down, into her room, she was hospitalized. They called it a stress-induced psychotic episode. She hasn't spoken since. But I looked at the ceiling tiles above her hospital bed yesterday. They're clean, white, sterile, except for one square. The one directly over where her head lies at night. There's a smudge on it. It wasn't there when I walked in. A long black streak, in the shape of a finger. When I left Lena's hospital room that night, something followed me. Not physically, I didn't see anyone, didn't hear footsteps or whispers, but something invisible pressed in around me, like the air was made of fingers. I got into my car and drove. I don't remember the ride. My hands shook the whole way, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, expecting to see something in the back seat. Nothing ever appeared, but I could feel it. Something had taken notice. When I got home, I stood in the driveway for a full 10 minutes. The house looked the same, silent, still, but every instinct had told me not to go inside. The kind of fear that isn't panic or adrenaline, just a sick certainty in your gut that something is wrong. Still, I went in. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or denial, or arrogance. I walked through the front door, turned on the lights. Half of them flickered, the others didn't work at all, and stood in the foyer, waiting. Nothing. Until I looked up. There were no new prints on the ceiling above the entry, but the ones in my bedroom were growing. I saw them through the open door across the hall. Footprints, smudged and sliding. A second handprint now, and claw marks. Faint, almost invisible. But there, 5 long streaks, raked backward from the edge of one handprint, like it had scraped the ceiling with inhuman fingers, trying to hold on. I stood there, staring, barely breathing, until a sound came from the attic. A knock, then another. Slow, deliberate. I should have run. I know that. Any sane person would. But I didn't. I grabbed the flashlight again, went to the hallway, and pulled down the attic ladder. The air that came down wasn't dusty. It was warm, like breath. The attic is small. Low ceiling, warped floorboards, insulation exposed between beams. When I climbed up, the smell hit me first, burnt hair and something metallic. I swept the flashlight in slow arcs. There was nothing. No raccoons, no squatters, no signs of fire. Until I saw the wall directly above my room. It was blackened. Not from soot exactly, but something stained it. There were symbols carved into the beam. Old ones, etched deep. Not English. Not anything I recognized. Crude figures, spirals, shapes that made my teeth itch. But the worst part was the hole. A small square section of the floor near the far end of the attic had been cut out. Just big enough for a person to curl into, like a coffin. Inside it, ash, piled almost a foot deep. And bones. Small ones. Fingertips. Burnt clean. I backed out of the attic, closed it up, and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I started researching the house. Not ghost stories. Not urban legends. Actual records. My grandfather bought the house in 1962. He never sold it. Never moved. My mother grew up here, but she never talked about it. I found a few old photos in the basement, family portraits, mostly stiff black and white ones. In all of them, my grandfather was smiling. My grandmother, however, never appeared. When I called my mom, she hung up the moment I said the house's name. I tried again. She blocked me. So I called an archivist in the town's historical society. She was polite, too polite. When I mentioned the address, her voice dropped. That house isn't supposed to be occupied, she said. What do you mean? It was condemned. In the 80s. After what happened? What happened? A pause. Then, they found a priest inside. Dead. Starved. But the windows were open. The kitchen stocked. He had locks on the side of the door. They said he was performing a ritual, but no one ever figured out what he was trying to stop. I asked for records. She said they'd been sealed. Burned, even. I don't think you should be living there, she added. That place. It remembers. Whatever it was. It doesn't want to be forgotten. That night, my phone rang at 3:14 a.m. I picked it up without thinking. There was no number, just unknown caller. When I answered, I heard scraping. Fingernails dragging across wood. Then a voice, faint but clear. Don't leave. It's almost ready. I dropped the phone. It rang again. Same caller. I didn't pick up. Instead, I grabbed my keys and ran outside. I got into the car and drove until sunrise, parking in a Walmart lot off Route 7. I watched the windows of the house grow smaller in the mirror. But the image didn't feel done. Like the story wasn't finished. Like something hadn't left yet. I stayed in a motel for 2 nights. Cheap, ugly, but safe. Or so I thought. The second morning, I found a black smudge on the ceiling above the motel bed. It was a handprint, and it was upside down. I returned to the house that evening, dreading every step up the porch. I unlocked the door and immediately heard the creak of footsteps on the second floor. Pacing, just like that first night, except now it was faster. Desperate. I went upstairs slowly. The hallway was dark. My bedroom door closed. But under the crack, a faint red light glowed. I opened it. Inside, the ceiling was covered. Footprints, handprints, scrapes, symbols, even faces, stretched impressions of open mouths, some screaming, others grinning. All of them soot black, smeared and half-formed, like 1,000 things had crawled upside down over that room in the night. And in the center of the ceiling, right above my bed, was a hole. No drywall, just an opening. And from it, I swear to you, I heard something breathing. Slow, deep, and waiting. I returned to the house that evening, dreading every step up the porch. The house looked the same, silent still, but every instinct had told me not to go inside. The kind of fear that isn't panic or adrenaline, just a sick certainty in your gut that something is wrong. Still, I went in. Inside, the ceiling was covered. Footprints, handprints, scrapes, symbols. Even faces, stretched impressions of open mouths, some screaming, others grinning. All of them soot black, smeared and half-formed, like 1,000 things had crawled upside down over that room in the night. And in the center of the ceiling, right above my bed, was a hole. No drywall, just an opening. And from it, I swear to you, I heard something breathing. Slow, deep, and waiting. I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and left, checking into a motel on the outskirts of town. The room was nondescript, the kind that could belong to any roadside stop. I tried to sleep, but the image of that hole in the ceiling haunted me. In the early hours, I awoke to a faint sound, a soft scratching above me. I looked up. There, on the motel ceiling, was a single, soot-black handprint. Upside down. Desperate for answers, I visited the town's historical society the next day. The archivist, an elderly woman named Margaret, greeted me with a wary smile. While I mentioned the address, her expression darkened. That house. It has a history, she said. She led me to a back room filled with old records and newspaper clippings. Together, we uncovered a series of incidents spanning decades, disappearances, unexplained deaths, and reports of strange symbols and soot marks. One article detailed the account of a priest who had locked himself inside the house in the 1980s, attempting to perform a ritual. He was found dead weeks later, starved, despite the kitchen being fully stocked. The windows were open, and there were no signs of forced entry. Margaret looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. Whatever it is, it's not bound by the walls of that house. Back at the motel, I found a package waiting for me at the front desk. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, an old black and white image of my bedroom ceiling, covered in soot prints. On the back, a message scrawled in shaky handwriting. It's always been there. I knew I couldn't run from this. I had to confront it. Armed with the knowledge from the archives, I returned to the house, determined to face whatever awaited me. Inside, the air was thick, oppressive. The soot prints had spread to every room, covering walls and ceilings. The symbols were more intricate now, pulsating with a dark energy. In the center of the living room, a trapdoor I had never noticed before lay open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. I took a deep breath and stepped down. I don't remember stepping down into the darkness. My memory of that moment fractures like something was torn away. 1 second, I was staring into the open trapdoor in the living room floor. The next, I was descending narrow wooden steps slick with cold moisture and covered in soot. There was no light, not even the spill from the room above. but I could feel it, an immense presence pressing against me from all sides. The air was thicker with each step, full of rot and scorched metal. And then, click, my foot landed on something that shifted beneath me, like a rib cracking under pressure. I clicked on my phone's flashlight, and in that beam, the hidden space was revealed. It was not a basement. It was a room that shouldn't exist. The walls were stone, but not brick or concrete. They were rough and natural, like the space had been carved out of the earth itself. Charred wood beams ran along the top, ceiling supports blackened and sagging. And nailed across the far wall were dozens of photographs, each one curling with age, their edges stained and crumbling. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming to leave. But my curiosity, or something deeper, something not mine, pulled me forward. The photos were of ceilings. Different rooms, different decades, but all showed the same thing. Soot-black prints, some so thick and detailed they seemed to pulse on the page. I recognized one immediately. My bedroom ceiling. But then I saw another. My motel room. And another. A small space with peeling green paint and a hanging bulb. Margaret's archive room. There were dates written on the back of each photograph. Some went back to the early 1900s. One was dated last week. It showed the ceiling of my parents' old house. A house I hadn't stepped foot in since childhood. A sudden movement. I turned, expecting shadows, but instead I saw a mirror mounted to the wall behind me. Strange in a space with no electricity. It was old, the glass fogged and warped, but I leaned closer. I shouldn't have. In the reflection, the room was empty, except for something crouched on the ceiling, directly above me. It wasn't human. Its limbs were jointed wrong, reversed like a spider's, and long soot-stained hands clung to the beams. Its face, if it had one, was buried in the corner, whispering rapidly in a language I couldn't understand. My heart stopped. I turned around. Nothing. The room was empty, but the breathing began. Long, rattled inhales, pulled through cracked ribs and dry earth. Then a nail. It clinked as it dropped from the ceiling, landing at my feet. I looked up. More nails had been hammered into the beams. Hundreds, all pointing downward, some loose, some rusted in. And as I watched, one began to move, slowly, unscrewing itself from the wood with a groan. I ran. Back upstairs, the house had changed. The trapdoor vanished the moment I slammed it shut. The walls were no longer cracked or soot-stained. They were pulsing, expanding, and contracting like lungs. The house was breathing now, following me, watching. I grabbed my keys and left. This time, I didn't go to a motel. I didn't go to a friend's house. I drove until sunrise and parked outside a diner in a town I didn't know the name of. Sleep didn't come, because in the corner of the window, on the inside of the glass, was a single black handprint. I returned to Margaret's archive building the next day, only to find it condemned. Windows boarded, door padlocked. I called her number, disconnected. No forwarding address. No records. It was like she'd vanished, or never existed. I drove to the historical records office to ask if they'd transferred the materials. The woman at the desk gave me a blank stare when I asked about Margaret. No one by that name ever worked here. I showed her a photo I had taken of Margaret and I standing in the archive room together. She looked closely, then slowly shook her head. There's no one standing next to you. I looked. She was right. I couldn't go back home. So I went to the only place I knew from those photos that hadn't appeared yet, the house I grew up in. My parents were gone now, long past, and the property was left to rot. I broke the lock and stepped inside. The air smelled burnt, like something had recently been scorched. I turned on the light. Soot-like, on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling. And in the center of the living room was a mirror, not from my childhood, not something I remembered. The surface shimmered like oil and pulsed when I approached. There was something inside it, watching me, or waiting for me. Then I heard the nails. Clink, 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 rattling loose from somewhere above. I didn't move. I couldn't, because something whispered my name from behind the glass. Not in a voice I recognized, but in my own voice. The first night back after the attic incident, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, the light of my phone screen bleeding into the dark room as I watched the ceiling. I kept imagining the soot prints above me. Even after scrubbing them with bleach and water, the memory of them was stamped into my vision like an afterimage. They were burned into my mind, those little feet, the gaps between the toes too wide, the arches slightly curved inward as if something hadn't walked but crawled. Upside down. The attic door had remained shut since that night. I had nailed it closed. I didn't tell Amy. I told her the noise was from raccoons and that I'd set a humane trap. But she wasn't fooled. She hadn't slept much either. She kept insisting she heard faint scratching above the ceiling at night, even when the baby monitor was off. And then came the voices. They didn't sound like speech. It was more like whispers made by someone who had never spoken before, wet, breathless murmurs, as if the walls had lungs and the insulation was slowly learning to inhale. It started around 1:13 a.m. 3 nights ago. I just turned over in bed when I heard a soft gasp from the monitor, followed by a thump. Amy was already upright beside me, clutching the monitor. "Did you hear that?" she asked, eyes wide. Her hand trembled as she held the device. The screen was black and white, showing a fuzzy grain of the crib. Then the signal cut to static. "I'm going in," she said. I grabbed her wrist. No, wait. But she was already out of bed. I followed, half expecting to find something wrong, and I did, but not the way I imagined. Our daughter, Ivy, was asleep, but the soot prints were back. This time, they were on the nursery ceiling. Only 3 sets. One near the crib, one above the window, and one directly above the door where Amy and I now stood. They were still fresh. I could smell the soot. It had a strange odor like burnt hair and mold. Amy didn't say a word. She just turned and walked out. She didn't speak for hours. The next morning, I called a priest. I didn't even consider how ridiculous it might sound. I simply told him we were having spiritual disturbances in the house, and that something was wrong with the attic. He agreed to visit that evening. I didn't tell him about the soot prints. Didn't tell him about the thing I'd seen curled up under the insulation that night in the attic, the thing that had the shape of a child but didn't breathe right, whose mouth didn't move when I whispered hello, but whose presence vibrated like a suppressed scream in my teeth. When the priest arrived, Ivy was asleep again, and Amy was in the kitchen with her hands in a bowl of water, just staring into the sink. She'd been washing the same spoon for half an hour. Father Glenn was older than I expected, with eyes that seemed to have seen far worse than anything I'd imagined. He didn't hesitate when I showed him the attic. When I pulled away the nailed board and opened the hatch, a slow gust of warm air drifted down into my face. The smell of soot was overpowering. The priest didn't comment. He just muttered a short prayer and climbed the ladder. I waited below. Minutes passed. I could hear him moving around above, the soft creaks of the floorboards, a few murmured prayers, the rhythmic splash of holy water. Then he screamed. It was a short, guttural cry, cut off so quickly I questioned if I had heard it at all. "Father Glenn," I called up. Silence. I climbed the ladder. He was crouched in the far corner, facing the wall, his back to me. "Father." When he turned, his eyes were brimming with tears. He held up the baby monitor. It was covered in soot. I stared at it, confused. "What?" "That's from the nursery." He shook his head slowly. "No, it's not. Look." He turned the screen toward me. There was a live feed showing the attic, us standing in it. But the timestamp was wrong. It was set to December 13th, 1978. "I think this place remembers things," he whispered. "And I think something remembers you." That night, Amy left. She took Ivy and drove to her sister's house. She didn't argue, didn't scream. She simply said, "There's something in this house that wants to keep us, and I won't let it." I didn't stop her, because I knew it was true. After they left, the house felt colder. Not emptier, just waiting. Every floorboard creaked differently. The light bulbs buzzed at a higher pitch. The bathroom mirror fogged even when the room was cold. And sometimes when I wiped it clear, I thought I saw something else in the reflection, someone behind me who never quite resolved into a shape. And the soot prints multiplied. They were on the walls now, the corners, the insides of the kitchen cabinets. And they weren't always footprints. Sometimes they were handprints, long, small fingers that ended too abruptly or started too late, like they'd been drawn wrong. Sometimes they were mouths, black, gaping prints, like something had tried to bite its way out of the plaster. But the worst part came the next morning. The baby monitor was back. It was sitting on the nightstand beside me when I woke up, and it was on. No static, no white noise, just soft breathing. It was around 3:13 a.m. when the screen lit up by itself. I was half asleep, the monitor facing me. At first, I thought it had glitched, but then I realized the feed was live, showing a room. Not Ivy's nursery, not the attic, somewhere else. A stone room. The walls were cracked and wet. The ceiling was low. There were no windows. And in the far corner, half submerged in shadow, was a crib. My breath froze, because I recognized that crib. It had been in the attic when we first moved in. We'd thrown it away, but there it was. And in it was a bundle. Small, unmoving, until it wasn't. It began to stir. A hand curled up from under the blanket, blackened fingers coated in soot. Nails cracked, wrist thin like rebar. The hand reached out and began tapping the side of the crib. Once, twice, 13 times. And then the monitor shut off. The next day, I went back to the attic. The priest hadn't returned any of my calls. I didn't blame him. I brought a flashlight, a hammer, and a can of gasoline. I was going to burn the damn thing down if I had to. But when I got into the attic, it wasn't the same. The dimensions were wrong. It was deeper, wider. The back wall was gone, and in its place was a dark corridor leading into what looked like a brick tunnel. I knew that tunnel. I'd seen it in the monitor, and I knew, in some impossible way, that the room at the end was where the other crib was. But instead, I stepped forward. I walked, one foot after another. The soot prints were on the floor now, guiding me. They formed a path. Some were footprints. Some were hands. Some were knees. And all of them led to the same place. The air was wet. The walls pulsed slightly, like the house was breathing in its sleep. When I finally reached the end of the tunnel, I saw the room. It was real, just like the monitor. The crib was there, and so was the thing inside. But this time it wasn't lying down. It was standing, thin, taller than a toddler, shoulders hunched, limbs bent the wrong way, and its face was covered by a mask made of baby teeth. Hundreds of them. I screamed. It turned its head slowly toward me, the mask twitching as if it was part of the skin. And then it whispered, not in words, in breath, in a sound I'd heard before, the sound that had been on the monitor. The wet inhale, the click of small jaws closing. I dropped the flashlight, ran, didn't stop until I burst out of the attic and slammed the hatch shut behind me. It's been 3 nights since then. Amy won't answer my calls. I don't blame her. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I just watch the monitor. It's still showing the room, the crib. And last night, the figure stepped out of the frame. And I think it's here now, somewhere in the house. Because this morning, when I woke up, there were soot prints all over the floor, leading from the attic to my bedroom door. And the monitor? It's off, but I can still hear breathing, right behind me. I wasn't sleeping anymore. Not really. Even when I closed my eyes, the rhythm of that soft, wet scuttling above my ceiling hummed just beneath consciousness. I'd memorized its patterns. It didn't come with the rain anymore. It came with silence. It came when the whole house held its breath. By the time I decided to return to the attic, the soot prints had multiplied. They no longer traced a straight line. They formed spirals now, erratic and branching off in directions that defied the layout of my home. One even trailed into the hallway above my bedroom door, bending sharply into the wall like the walker had phased through it. I didn't tell anyone, not the priest who blessed the house a second time and nearly vomited in my living room. Not Danny, who stopped calling after I sent her that voice recording. Not even the paranormal investigator who emailed me a single sentence after viewing the footage from my attic. I can't help you. I slept on the couch for 3 nights before I accepted that it didn't matter. Whatever it was, it had moved closer. It wanted me to notice. And maybe, just maybe it wanted me to know what it used to be. I brought a crowbar this time. The attic hatch was stiff, resistant like flesh healing over a wound. It creaked open with a damn snap. The smell hit me immediately. Wet ash rot, something alive, struggling in wet insulation. My flashlight flickered as soon as I poked my head into the dark. That's when I saw it. Not a shadow, not soot, but something glistening pressed against the sloped ceiling beams. A smear of flesh, red and black like burned skin stretched across the rafters. A half-sunken eye blinked once. Then again, I nearly fell back through the hatch, but the house groaned as if warning me not to. Then it whispered, "We lived in the fire." I thought the voice came from behind me, but it echoed everywhere through the walls, through my bones. And I knew the prints on the ceiling weren't made by something walking. They were made by something crawling away. Let me pause here and continue into the next message so I can give you the complete, long final part properly.